Pete Calandra here. Piano is my main instrument. I've performed in some of the biggest Broadway shows of the past 30 years, on stage with a full orchestra at Carnegie Hall, jazz in clubs of New York City. I've even played keyboards in the Radio City Music Hall Orchestra for an entire summer. Much of the music I compose for films and my own personal albums is piano-based. As a result, I've spent quite a bit of time mixing and fitting a piano performance into many different size ensembles in many styles of music. Both of these activities have had an influence on how I mix piano in a track. Today's video will go over 3 examples in 3 different settings. I'll put links in the description box below for the full version of these tracks. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Ken Freeman, a fantastic engineer whom I've been friends with for decades. I've learned quite a bit about mixing from him, and we worked together on mixes for the first 2 examples. There's a link below for his website. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and if you want to be notified, ring that bell. Feel free to leave a comment or suggestion below. Thanks for watching, and let's get started. The first setting features the score for the 2016 Kennedy Center Honors short film honoring Al Pacino's film and TV career. Fairly large orchestral setting, and while this piece goes through a variety of moods, the piano maintains an 8th note ostinato and it drives the piece. Let's take a listen to a bit of this. My first thought on mixing piano is that mixing starts during the writing process. Compose something for the piano that fits into the orchestration of what you're writing. This gives you a head start, as fitting your piano into an arrangement properly will lessen the number of issues that can come up during a mix. The next one is to record your piano with the end result in mind. Or, if you're using sampled piano, choose a sampled piano with the end result in mind. For this piece, I knew the piano needed to be bright and not have a wide stereo field, as its main function was to drive the piece with the ostinato I played. All the tracks in this piece are sampled instruments from Spitfire, Orchestral tools, and Cinesamples, but the piano is my C7 recorded in my living room. I used a pair of Neumann KM184s in XY close to the hammers to get a bright sound with a tight stereo field. Let's take a listen. You'll find that it's bright but not piercing with a tight stereo field, and this will help it cut through the dense mix very nicely. And let me just mute some of these effects also. Okay. There are many styles of orchestration, and the more of these you know, the wider the scope of expressive music you can create. The technique on this piece is one where all the sections have a full complete sound that locks into the other sections. This means that we can listen to the different sections together, which we'll do, and see how the piano fits in with them. But the first thing I want to talk about is, while the piano is using this rhythm, notice that I am not playing very heavy stuff with my left hand. I'm also keeping the pitch register kind of tight because I want a nice point that fits through. If I needed some low notes on the piano, I would record a second track with just those low notes, which I'll show you in a second. I wanted this also to have a little bit of a dreamy quality to it, so I pulled that off with a combination of time-based effects and doublings. So if we listen to the celeste part, right? It's almost the same part. It adds a nice sheen to it. And then on top of that, or in addition to that, we have a little bit of the harp. Let me just solo the harp there. Play that with the piano. That's too much. I just wanted it to be a little bit of a texture in the background. So the three of those together I wanted this to have, again, a little bit of a sheen to it, so I inserted, which I don't usually do with time-based effects. I use those as a send. In this instance, I wanted it to affect the sound directly. I'm using this MXR doubler, flanger doubler, which is a UAD plugin, and let's hear it with that. I'll turn the mix up so you can really hear it. Turn it back down. And then I compress it a little bit with just a touch of this. The other thing about using the Teltronics is that it colors the sound also in a way that I kind of like. Notice I haven't used any EQ on this piano. I recorded it this way, and I was fortunate enough that the tone actually fit really well. Now, to add to the dreaminess, we have a little bit of lexicon reverb. And what we did here was a high-pass filter and turned down some of the mids. This is something that you can do with reverb and all time-based effects, is that you can tailor the sound afterwards if it doesn't have the controls that you want with plugins, EQ plugins, and filters. And then I added some Lexicon 224, an additional reverb. It has a really nice warm tail. And then to add a little bit to the rhythmic propulsion, I've added a little bit of delay here. So I've got an eighth note and a quarter note. The celeste and the harp. I also have a second track here, which is low piano. And this is my sampled piano. This, I believe, is the German D from Ivory. Now, what's nice about doing this on a second track is that you have much more control over it. Let's take a listen right before the piano comes in. That'll just fit in with my left hand on the piano. Let's go a little bit further ahead. So let's solo the piano, the harp, and we'll solo all these yellow tracks. So you got a little chime in there. Actually, the chime is interesting because I've got this low chime here. And that's doubled with a tubular bell and octave higher. I've got those panned left and right. And then now let's, we'll solo those and we'll solo the piano. And then also what I'd like to do is go up here to some of these percussion elements and solo those. So you hear how all that stuff locks in rhythmically and there's space for everything to be heard. And then let's go to the strings. They're just doing the accents and they're leaving the eighth notes to be held in the piano. I hope that this one's been helpful, so let's move on to the next one. This next example is a track from my 2017 release, The Road Home. It's titled The Cat's Eye. Again, there's a link in the description box below for the full track so that you can hear it. But right now, I'm just going to play a little bit of this track. I'm using two pianos on here. Again, my Yamaha C7 and Native Instruments una corda. So let's solo the una corda, which is a felt piano. All right, and you notice that I do a little volume automation here. And let's look at the EQ. Right, a little high pass to get rid of some of the low. And then some Renaissance EQ to drop off just a little bit of the mids and a little boost. And then here I've got, I don't typically insert time-based effects into a track. I forget why I did it here. I usually do sends, but this is the only track that's using it, so probably I liked the sound that this gave. No reverb. Right, it just sounds like it's further away. And now let's take a look at the acoustic piano. Again, this is my C7 and I played it in. And this time I used different microphones. I used these Lauten, and I forget what they are exactly, but they are small capsule condenser mics. They have a cardioid pattern and they also have tubes in them. So they're very warm and very detailed. That kind of recording fit in more with this type of performance. I did have to do some additional EQing on it. Again, scooping out some of these low mids and adding a little high end there. And then adding some bottom here. And a little bit of sheen on the top end. And then again, using the LA2A for compression. You can hear that that's got a much richer tone than on the previous example. A little bit of Lexicon Hall here. In this example, what you can hear is that I'm playing full chords, right? They almost sound like something you'd hear in Debussy, these block chords here. And let's hear how that fits in with the una corda. And then over here, the second time through, I believe we are doubling this with, yes, we have bells, orchestral bells, and we have vocals. Just a choir sample. I forget who it is. It might be the Omnisphere. Now notice, what I don't do here is I don't copy the rhythm on the piano. I just copy the harmonies and the melodic line. I don't write do do dee da. It's do dee ah, right? And that fits in nicely. Adds a nice sheen to the melody. It really helps it stand out. And also doubling that with the orchestra bells. All right, let's move forward a little bit to this section here. Now, if you notice there, the most important thing to me is the ascending bass line and the melody. And I try to keep my piano part, again, to just what I need so that it leaves room for me to add the other instruments. Let's go back to the previous section, because what's nice here about what I've done with this melodic figure, where there's a line and then there's space and then there's the line and then there's more space, that gives me room to add some counter lines. So listen to how the bass fits in with that. And here we are. And then again, I leave space in the piano, and then there's a little fill in the bass. The bass is my mini Moog. Right, see how I do that fill right there? Dee dee doo 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 doo. And I don't do really any driving rhythmic stuff with the piano because I've got that covered with the acoustic guitars. This is a technique that I use often, where I play similar things on the acoustic guitar and I pan it left and right. This also relates back to how I arrange my piano parts. I don't have bass notes in that acoustic guitar. It's really just the upper few notes, 3 notes that I'm playing, and the open strings that are ringing. If there is a bass note, it's up inside of the chord somewhere. It's not at the bottom. And this leaves a lot of space for your bass instrument to cut through. Let's listen to this with the bass. Right? You can hear how clear the bass is. And the guitars just float on top of that, and they drive the rhythm along. See how all that fits together like a glove. So again, a big part of my concept for mixing piano is that a lot of the mixing is solved when you write the proper part to fit in with the aggregate whole of your entire arrangement. Each instrument has a function, And whatever you write and record needs to respect what those other instruments are going to do. I knew in my mind what the ensemble for this piece was going to be before I started writing it. As I was composing, I was making sure that I was leaving space for those other instruments. Right, and here's the una corda with the acoustic piano, so it's just adding some fullness to the... It just sort of adds a dreamy sheen to the piano in the background. Let's go forward a little to the melodica solo here. So here I'm just accompanying, and I'm just playing some very simple things. And then let's hear it with the guitar. And now we'll change it. Right, when the form changes, the piano part changes. I want a little bit more emphasis here. Right, second time through, change up the pattern a little bit, and I'm playing big block chords up a little bit on the piano pitch-wise. So there's room for everybody to live. Right, you got your bass, and you've got your drums. Right, everything fits in like a glove. And when you write stuff like that, it becomes much, much easier to mix. And is there anything different? No. There's the outro. Just some varied comping. Leaving space for the bass. There is a kalimba in here also. Adding a hypnotic pattern in there. Right, and it's leaving space for me to give the fullness with strings and vocals. And also, again, notice that there's not a lot of low end. It's a lot of mid-range stuff. Leaves space for the bass. And then it also leaves space for this Odyssey French hornish kind of sound. Very simple. Just a couple of notes. And what I did was I double-tracked this and I panned it hard left and right. And I changed the filter a little bit so you could see that the envelope is also a little bit different on this one as opposed to this one. Just to give a little variation on the sound instead of it being an exact copy. So you can hear my left hand chords, they're there, but they're softer than when I'm playing in the right hand, and they don't get in the way of all the other instruments that are playing. And I guess that's one of the main points here, is that what you write and what you play will determine how much mixing work you need. My whole concept is find the right part and the mixing becomes a lot easier. Again, there's a link to this piece below, and let's move on to the third example. This is an example of how I'm using processing and EQing to fix and do some corrective work to get me the timbre that I'm hearing when I'm playing, but I'm not capturing via the recording. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Let me just play a little bit of this piece though. All right, this was recorded on my Yamaha C7, and this was recorded in my home in the Hudson Valley of New York. It's a fairly small room. I think it's about 10 by 15 with about 8-foot ceilings. And even though I've got it treated, it is still bright. This is contrasted by the last two examples, which were recorded in my New York City apartment. Same piano, different room. My New York City apartment was 300 square feet, and it had 10-foot ceilings, bookcases, carpets, as well as acoustic treatment, and it was a really good sounding room. Plus, those were recorded 2 or 3 years ago, and my piano, I've played it a lot since then, and it probably needs a regulation and a voicing. On the previous 2 recordings, I used condenser mics, and I set up equal space or XY depending upon the piece. On this particular piece, I'm using the Earthworks piano mic, which is permanently set up inside my piano, and that's attached to my Mix Pre 6 by Sound Devices. The Mix Pre 6 is really great. The Earthworks mics are very clean. They sound really good, but they're very close to the hammers on the piano. So I felt in order to get the sound that I wanted, I had to do some work. So I'm going to mute all of these processors, and we'll take a listen to the sound of the piano again. We'll go a little further in. Okay, it still sounds good, but it's a little thin, and it's also a little bit too bright, and you have no sense of depth. So I'm going to go one by one through all the steps I did. The first thing I did was I chopped off some of the high end and a little bit of the mid-range using Waves HEQ. Let me bypass this. Okay, you can really hear it up in this area here. Right, those high notes get really piercing. So that's better. As far as the mid-range goes, if I were to really bring this mid-range down, you'd hear that it would lose all the power and richness and warmth. Just a little bit cut, add some clarity to the sound. Now the next processor I use is this Summit Grand Channel, which is made by Softtube. Now this is a multi-processor. It's got EQ, and it also has a saturation, which is supposed to emulate tube saturation. And it has a wet-dry mix. So let's take a listen to this. Bypassed. Right, it's subtle, but it's thicker, a little bit warmer. And what I'm doing here is I'm boosting very low end, right, at 33, and a little bit at 1K. And the next thing I'm doing here, oh, and also a little bit at 560. So some of that mid-range I took down, I put back in, but it's going through this processor and it's making it a little bit thicker. There's a little bit of compression, even though you can't see anything moving here. If I turn the compressor off, right, you can hear how it's coloring the sound. And out. So let me do that again and watch what I do right in this area here when I turn it on and off. So it's off now. And then we've got some saturation here. So let me turn the saturation off. And here now it's distorting, right? So what I tend to do with things like this is to bring in enough so that you can just start to feel it and hear it, because we're going to be having so many different processors. You want them all to be a little subtle, except for that first one where I really need to chop off some of the high ends. And you get the cumulative effect of all of them together to sculpt and shape your sound the way you want to. The next thing I did was I added some of this Pultec emulation from UA. And this is great for two things. For the low end, it's beautiful for adding some low end, and I've got a wide bandwidth. And also the coloration it gives to the sound. So I will bypass it to start off. And then in. Right, you can hear it really adding some warmth to the low end. Let me try a different section. Bypass. Right, you can hear how much warmer the sound is with this. All right, moving forward, the next thing in the chain is the C4, which is a multi-band compressor from Waves. And all this is doing is just in the loudest sections, attenuating some of that mid-range and getting rid of a little bit of that honk. Yeah, you can really hear it in that when those chords come in. In. I'm not quite sure if you can hear this, but it's definitely getting rid of some of that high-end harshness. And that's by getting rid of some of this mid-range. I know that doesn't sound like it makes sense, but I can hear it. Now, it does seem like I might be contradictory, that I'm cutting the mid-range here and adding some back and then cutting and then attenuating it with a compressor here and there. But each one of these processors has their own sound and their own function. So that when something is softer and I'm using that summit to bring some of that mid-range back, that sounds great. But when the dynamics get really loud, mid-range might add too much to the sound that you don't like. And then you cut a little bit of that with the C4. The next two processors have to do with widening the sound a little bit. The first one is this BX-XL-V2 from Brainworks. I use this a lot. This is a compressor and it breaks up the center of your stereo field into low and high and also the sides. So what you can do here is you can affect the level of these different areas in the stereo field. Let's take a look at what I've done here and you can see that I've added some width. Now, let me take the middle completely out. Right, and you can hear there that there's some phasing issues. Let me bring the middle back in. And you see that it comes back in, it's just a little bit less wide. Again, my concept here is lots of small moves that add up in the aggregate to create the sound I want. And then on top of that, I'm doing a little bit more. I've attenuated the center using this plugin from Waves, and I've turned up the sides. I typically don't do things like this where I turn up the sides so much, but I felt like I was losing a little gain and I wanted to get it back. In other words, I would have taken this down an additional 6 dB and left this at 0. What happens when you spread out the stereo field is that the sound also becomes clearer because all the frequencies are not bunched up in the middle of your stereo field. You can hear the difference when I start enacting these two plugins. So listen now. The next two plugins have to do with adding space to the sound. So the first one is Altiverb 7, and I've just got that in the tel deck room. I have the reverb time cut down a bit, right? This is 5 meters, so I only have the reverb time at 47, a little less than half, and I've mixed it so that it's about 10 o'clock. Right? It just adds a little bit of ambience. Gives you a little sense of depth. And the next thing I've done is added some Pro R, a small hall that I've adjusted a little bit. And again, one thing I did with this was I brought the stereo width up a little bit from the preset, and I believe I brought the delay time down, or the reverb time down. Bypassed in. It's got a nice warm tail, as you can see by the EQ curve here. And the very last thing I've done here is I've gone through L3 just to bring up the levels and make sure that I'm not clipping. It's only a little bit, right? I haven't gone like this. I think this is a good place to stop this video now. We've gone through 3 examples: orchestral, sort of a jazz piece with Brazilian influences, and a solo piano piece, and 3 different ways of treating the piano. In review, what I'd like to state again, and it's not so much the case with this solo piece, but when you're writing music for piano that is going to fit into an ensemble, make sure what you write leaves space for the other instruments to fit in, and you will have less work to EQ and process that piano to make it work. So that's something to really be careful of and really pay attention to. Please leave a comment below if you've got any questions or if you've got some tips that you'd like to share. I've got links in the description box below for all 3 of these performances. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe. And if you'd like to be notified, ring that bell. I've been Pete Calandra. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.